Three producers rushed the stage during a commercial break and told Steve Harvey the episode could not air. The lead producer held a phone against her chest and said, "Legal says cut it. The sponsor says cut it. The network says cut it." Steve looked at the three of them and said, "Who says we air it?" Nobody answered. Steve said, "I do." He turned to the camera operator and said 6 words that would cost the show its largest sponsor and earn 530 million views. "Put it back on, all of it." February 6th, 2025. A Thursday afternoon inside the Atlanta Family Feud studio. The Marshall family from Baltimore, Maryland, stood on stage left. Anaya at the front, her mother Ruth behind her, her sister Keisha, her brother Marcus, and her best friend Tamara. Across from them stood the Coleman family from Philadelphia, a retired firefighter named Gerald and his 4 adult children who ran a youth boxing gym together. The Coleman family was loud and physical and full of joy. Anaya's family was quieter. Anaya had dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. She had been awake for 31 hours because Jade had been in the emergency room 2 nights ago with a sickle cell crisis, the 4th in 6 weeks. Jade was not at the taping. Jade was at home with a neighbor, connected to a pulse oximeter, waiting for her mother to come back. The taping had been scheduled for 2 p.m. Anaya's family had arrived at 7 a.m. because Ruth had insisted on being early. Anaya had spent the morning in the parking lot on the phone with the neighbor, getting updates on Jade's oxygen levels. The levels were stable. Anaya had said, "Call me if anything changes." She had said this 3,000 times in 7 years. The words no longer carried weight. They were just the sound of a mother who could not be in 2 places at once. Steve Harvey shook every hand on that stage. When he reached Anaya, she held his hand and said, "Thank you for letting us be here." Steve had smiled and said, "That's what we do, Mama." He had not known yet what being here was going to cost. But nobody in that studio knew what was about to happen. Jade Marshall had been diagnosed with sickle cell disease at 8 months old. The genetic screening had come back positive. The pediatrician had sat across from Anaya and explained what it meant. The misshapen red blood cells, the blocked blood vessels, the pain crises, the organ damage, the shortened life expectancy. Anaya had been 27. She had been alone. Jade's father had left before Jade was born. Anaya had looked at the doctor and said, "Tell me what to do and I'll do it." The doctor had told her. Anaya had done it. For 7 years, she had done everything. Jade's disease was severe. She had pain crises every 4 to 6 weeks. Each crisis lasted 2 to 5 days. During a crisis, Jade screamed. She screamed for hours. She screamed until her voice gave out, and then she cried silently with her mouth open and her fists clenched against her stomach. Anaya held her through every crisis. She held her at home. She held her in the emergency room. She held her in the pediatric ward at 3 a.m. while the nurses adjusted morphine drips and looked at Anaya with the expression medical professionals wear when they know the parent is running out of road. Jade could not run. She could not play at recess the way other children played. She sat on a bench with a water bottle and watched her classmates from a distance. Her teacher had told Anaya that Jade drew pictures during recess, pictures of herself running, jumping, climbing trees. The pictures were always in bright colors. The girl in the pictures always had a smile. The girl in the pictures was the Jade who lived inside Jade's imagination, the version of herself that the disease would not allow her to be. The treatment Jade needed was called hydroxyurea, a medication that reduces the frequency and severity of pain crises. Jade's hematologist had prescribed it when Jade was 4. Anaya's insurance company had denied coverage. The denial letter had said, "Requested medication deemed not medically necessary for patient's current presentation. Recommend continued management with pain protocol." Anaya had read the letter 4 times. The phrase, "not medically necessary," had been printed in size 10 font. Anaya had appealed, denied, appealed again, denied again. She had filed a formal complaint. The complaint had been received and logged. She had called the insurance company's member services line 23 times over 2 years. She had been transferred, put on hold, disconnected, and told 7 times that her case was under review. 6 denials in 3 years. The appeals process had been designed to exhaust. Each appeal required a different form. Each form required documentation from a different specialist. Each specialist required a separate appointment. Each appointment required time off work that Anaya could not afford. The first appeal alone had taken 6 weeks of phone calls, 3 missed shifts, and a 22-page document that a patient advocate had helped Anaya compile at 11 p.m. in the hospital cafeteria while Jade slept upstairs. The denial had come back in a single paragraph. The insurance company that had denied Jade's medication 6 times was Meridian Health Partners. Meridian Health Partners was one of the 3 largest sponsors of Family Feud. Anaya did not know this when she applied. She knew one thing. She needed $22,000 to pay for a year of Jade's medication out of pocket, and the Family Feud prize money was her best option. Anaya worked as a nurse's aide at a long-term care facility. She made $16.40 an hour. She worked 50 hours a week. After rent, utilities, food, Jade's uninsured medical expenses, and the minimum payments on the credit card debt she had accumulated from 41 emergency room visits in 7 years, medical debt totaling $67,000, Anaya had $11 left at the end of each month. She had been living on $11 of margin for 3 years. Ruth, Anaya's mother, had moved in 2 years ago to help with Jade. Ruth was 61 and had her own health problems, diabetes, high blood pressure, but she slept on a pull-out couch in the living room so Anaya could work the overnight shift when needed. Ruth held Jade during the crises that happened while Anaya was at work. Ruth had told Anaya once, at midnight in the kitchen, "Baby, this system was not built for children like Jade. It was built to say no until you stop asking." Anaya had not stopped asking. The lie Anaya told was to Jade. Every time Jade asked why the medicine had not started yet, Anaya told her the doctors were still getting it ready. She had been saying this for 3 years. Jade, who was 7 and who understood more than anyone gave her credit for, had asked Anaya 3 months before the taping the question Anaya could not answer. Jade had been lying in bed after a pain crisis, her face gray, her lips cracked, and she had looked at her mother and whispered, "Mama, why won't they help me?" Anaya had walked into the bathroom and pressed a towel against her face and screamed into it so Jade would not hear. And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. The part that made Steve cry came during the taping itself. The 3rd round of Family Feud had a question that changed the trajectory of the entire episode. The question was, name something you'd spend your last dollar on. The Coleman family had buzzed in first. Food, the eldest son said. Number 2 answer. The Marshall family buzzed in. Keisha said, rent. Number 3, back and forth, standard answers. Then it came back to Anaya. Steve said, Anaya, what would you spend your last dollar on? Anaya looked at Steve. She looked at the camera. She said, Medicine. For my daughter. She has sickle cell disease. Her insurance company has denied her medication 6 times. The company is called Meridian Health Partners. They have said 6 times that my daughter's medication is not medically necessary. My daughter is 7 years old. She screams in pain every month because a company decided her suffering doesn't cost them enough to fix. So, yes, my last dollar goes to medicine. The studio fell completely silent. The producer's phone started ringing. Then the second producer's phone. Then the third. The booth was lighting up. Somebody in legal had already contacted the control room. Meridian Health Partners was the show's second-largest advertising sponsor. Anaya had just named them on national television. The lead producer spoke into Steve's earpiece. "Steve, we need to go to commercial. Now." Steve did not move. "Steve," the producer repeated. "Commercial. Now. Legal is on the line." Steve reached up, pulled the earpiece from his ear, and placed it on the podium. He looked at Anaya. He said, "Say it again." Anaya said, "Meridian Health Partners. 6 denials. My daughter is 7. Steve turned to the camera. He said, "I hear the phones ringing in my booth. I know whose name she just said, and I know who writes checks to this show, and I need every person in this studio and every person watching at home to understand something. That name stays in this episode. Every word she just said stays, or I walk off this stage and I don't come back." The audience thought that was the peak. They were wrong. During the commercial break, 3 producers rushed the stage. The lead producer said, "Legal says cut it. The sponsor says cut it. The network says cut it." Steve looked at them. He said, "Who says we air it?" Nobody answered. Steve said, "I do. I choose her over sponsors." He turned to the camera operator. "Put it back on, all of it." The cameras came back on. Steve walked back to Anaya. The audience had not left their seats. "Anaya," Steve said, "I need to tell you something." He was shaking. 40 years ago, I wrote a goodbye letter to my family. I was in a car. I was broke. I was done. I was going to mail that letter and disappear. But something told me to stay. Something told me that one day I would stand on a stage and have to choose between comfort and the right thing. Today is that day, and I am choosing the right thing. Steve pulled out his phone. The first call went to a pediatric hematologist at Johns Hopkins. Steve said, "Dr. Williams, this is Steve Harvey. I have a 7-year-old girl named Jade Marshall. Sickle cell disease. Her medication has been denied 6 times. I need you to see her this week. I'm covering it." Dr. Williams said, "Bring her in Monday." The second call went to the CEO of an independent health coverage nonprofit Steve had been funding. Steve arranged for Jade to be switched to a plan that would cover hydroxyurea and all sickle cell treatments. Full coverage, no denials, indefinite. But Steve wasn't done. He stood silent for a moment. He looked at the floor. Then he looked at the audience and said something that was not scripted, not planned, not reviewed by any producer. "I have been on television for 25 years. I have sold advertising. I have read scripts. I have told jokes. And not once in 25 years has anyone in a control booth told me that the truth was too expensive to air. Tonight, someone did. And I need you to understand what that means. It means somewhere in this country, a company did the math and decided that a 7-year-old girl's pain costs less than a 30-second commercial. They're right about the math, but they're wrong about everything else." The studio fell completely silent. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the Coleman family. He told them they had won $20,000. He told the Marshall family they had also won $20,000. Both families. Gerald Coleman, the retired firefighter, walked across the stage and said, "Mr. Harvey, the Colemans are giving our prize to Jade, because I spent 30 years running into buildings to save children. And today, you just ran into one too." The audience stood. The crew stood. 2 camera operators were crying. Ruth was on her knees praying. Marcus had his arm around Anaya. Keisha was holding Tamara. But Steve wasn't done. He knelt in front of Anaya. He took her hands. He said, "You named them. On national television. You named the company that told your daughter no 6 times. That took more courage than anything I have ever seen on this stage." Jade's Shield Foundation, starting tonight, will make sure no child is ever denied medication because a company decided their pain wasn't profitable enough to treat. The studio fell completely silent. Then it erupted. Every person in the building was standing. Meridian Health Partners pulled their sponsorship the following morning. The show lost $4,200,000 in annual advertising revenue. Steve issued one public statement: "Worth it." The episode aired 3 days later. It pulled 530 million views in the first 2 weeks. The hashtag #AirItAnyway trended in 64 countries. The clip of Steve saying, "I choose her over sponsors," was shared 420 million times. The clip of Anaya naming Meridian Health Partners played on every cable news network for 16 straight days. 12 state attorneys general opened investigations into Meridian's denial practices within the first month. Jade's Shield Foundation raised $11 million in the first 3 weeks. A pharmaceutical company donated a year's supply of hydroxyurea for 500 children. A children's hospital network pledged $2 million in sickle cell treatment. A 7-year-old boy in Atlanta, who also had sickle cell, sent Jade a drawing of himself running. He wrote on the back, "For the girl who draws running pictures too." Jade started hydroxyurea the Monday after the taping. Dr. Williams monitored her weekly. Within 3 months, her pain crises dropped from every 4 weeks to every 14 weeks. Within 6 months, she went an entire month without a crisis for the first time in her life. 6 months after the episode, Jade ran at recess. She ran across the playground, touched the fence, and ran back. Her teacher called Anaya crying. Jade came home that day and drew a picture. For the first time, the girl in the picture was not running. She was standing still and smiling. Jade had said, "I don't have to draw running anymore, Mama. I can just do it." 8 months after the episode, Anaya was invited to testify before Congress about insurance denial practices for pediatric chronic conditions. She sat at the witness table and told the committee exactly what she had told Steve Harvey. Jade's name, the 6 denials, the emergency room visits, the phrase, "not medically necessary." A senator leaned into his microphone and asked Anaya what she would say to the CEO of Meridian Health Partners if he were in the room. Anaya said, "I would ask him if his children have ever screamed in pain while he decided whether they deserved medicine. I would ask him to sit with that question the way I sit with my daughter every month." 3 senators co-sponsored a bill within 2 weeks. The bill was called the Jade Marshall Act. 1 year later, Meridian Health Partners had settled a class action lawsuit for $340 million. Their denial rate for pediatric sickle cell medications had dropped from 67% to 4%. The congressional hearing that cited the Family Feud episode by name was called the Jade Marshall Hearing. 2 years later, Jade's Shield Foundation had funded medication access for over 4,000 children denied by insurance companies across 44 states. Anaya sat on the board. Ruth sat beside her. Jade, now 9, spoke at foundation events by standing on a step stool behind a podium and telling audiences, "They said my medicine wasn't necessary. I was necessary." Steve gave one interview about the night they told him not to air the episode. The interviewer asked if he had been afraid of losing the sponsor. Steve said, "I was afraid of one thing. I was afraid of looking at that little girl's picture, the one where she's running because she can't, and knowing I had the power to put it on television and chose not to. That was the only thing I was afraid of." On a Monday afternoon in September, Jade Marshall walks through the front door of her school carrying a backpack that is heavier than she used to be able to lift. Her braids bounce when she walks. Her pulse oximeter is in her mother's purse, not on her finger. She walks past the bench where she used to sit during recess. She does not sit down. She keeps walking, out the door, onto the playground, into the grass. And she runs. Some stories are told because they are comfortable. Some stories are buried because they are not. And some stories are aired because one man stands on a stage and decides that a 7-year-old girl's pain matters more than a quarterly earnings report. If this story made you feel something real, subscribe right now. Because Jade Marshall was told 6 times that she did not matter enough to help. Steve Harvey decided she did. And the only way we keep finding the Jades is if we keep watching.